In the pale hours before dawn, when the sky holds neither darkness nor light, the earth turns as it has for 4.5 billion years. Somewhere beneath the seafloor, in trenches so deep that no memory of the sun has ever reached them, stone folds into itself, drawn downward by forces older than anything that walks or breathes. The continents drift overhead like slow clouds, carrying their mountains and their forests, their deserts and their ice across the face of the planet. They have been drifting since before the first eye opened to see them. They will be drifting still when the last eye closes. There is a question that rises in such quiet moments, a question that does not demand an answer so much as it asks to be held, to be turned over gently in the mind, like a smooth stone worn by ancient rivers. If the earth has been reshaping itself for so long, erasing and rewriting its own surface like a palimpsest of stone, could something have existed before us and left no trace? Could there be evidence of civilizations older than the continents themselves, buried beneath the weight of epochs, dissolved into the very matter of the world? The thought settles like dust on still water. It does not disturb. It only asks us to wonder. We speak of deep time as though we understand it, but the human mind was not built for such expanses. A century feels long, 1,000 years feels ancient, 1,000,000 years stretches beyond what we can truly grasp, and yet the earth measures time in hundreds of millions, in billions, in spans so vast that the rise and fall of entire mountain ranges becomes a single, slow breath, a heartbeat in the life of a planet. In such time, continents are not fixed things. They wander. They collide. They break apart and reassemble in new configurations, like pieces of a puzzle that keeps changing its own picture, endlessly recombining into patterns that no human eye has ever witnessed. The first light appears on the horizon. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient sea, one that evaporated 200 million years before the dinosaurs evolved, its waters long since dispersed into rain and ice and the moisture of countless living things. The sand beneath your feet was once the floor of that ocean, compressed and lithified and lifted by forces that work on timescales we can barely comprehend. The very ground we stand upon is a record of transformation, of seas that came and went, of mountains that rose and eroded to plains, of ice ages and warm periods that alternated like the breathing of some vast sleeping creature dreaming in stone. Everything waits. The crust beneath our feet is not eternal. It is constantly being created and destroyed, emerging molten from the mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates pull apart, and sinking back into the mantle at the subduction zones where they converge. Most geologists agree that the oldest oceanic crust is only about 200 million years old, a span that seems immense to human perception, but is less than 5% of the Earth's total age. Everything older has already descended into the Earth's interior, melted and remixed in the great convection currents of the mantle, and been remade into something new. The continents are more durable, carrying rocks that date back billions of years, but even they are subject to the patient work of erosion, the slow grinding of glaciers, the chemical weathering of rain that falls century after century, dissolving the very mountains it touches grain by grain. This is the first challenge that faces anyone who wonders about truly ancient civilizations. The earth does not preserve. It transforms. It recycles. It forgets. Evidence suggests that roughly 250 million years ago, all the continents were gathered together in a single vast landmass that scientists call Pangaea. The supercontinent stretched from pole to pole, its interior so far from any ocean that vast deserts formed where monsoons could not reach, where rain shadows extended for thousands of miles across landscapes of red stone and ancient dunes. Before that, other supercontinents had formed and broken apart in cycles that repeated across hundreds of millions of years. Rodinia existed perhaps 1 billion years ago, its configuration still debated, its coastlines forever unknown. Columbia came before that, and perhaps others earlier still, stretching back into spans of time where the evidence becomes ever more fragmentary, ever more difficult to read. The names are human inventions, attempts to give shape to something we can only glimpse through fragments of evidence preserved by accidents of geology. The rocks remember, but they remember in a language that requires centuries of study to begin to understand. A language written in mineral composition and isotope ratios, and the alignment of magnetic particles that recorded the orientation of the planet's magnetic field at the moment they solidified, billions of years ago, under skies that held different constellations. The morning light grows stronger. Consider what happens to the works of a civilization over time. The buildings we construct are made of materials drawn from the earth, and over millions of years, they would return to it. Concrete crumbles as water seeps into its pores and freezes, expanding, cracking, fragmenting the structures we thought so solid. Steel rusts and oxidizes until nothing remains but scattered iron compounds indistinguishable from natural deposits, red and brown streaks in sedimentary layers that future geologists would read as ordinary mineral beds. Glass devitrifies, its crystalline structure slowly reorganizing over millennia, becoming opaque and eventually dissolving altogether into silica sand. Wood decays in years or decades, paper in months. Plastic, which we once thought eternal, breaks down under ultraviolet light and bacterial action, fragmenting into smaller and smaller pieces until the molecules themselves disperse into the soil and water. Some researchers propose that even the most durable structures would leave no recognizable traces after 50 million years. After 100 million years, after 500 million, the evidence would be indistinguishable from natural geology. The roads would be gone, their asphalt oxidized and scattered. The foundations would be gone, their concrete returned to limestone dust. The buried cables and pipes and tunnels would be compressed and metamorphosed into streaks of altered rock that no future geologist would recognize as anything but unusual mineral deposits, curious but unremarkable. This is not destruction in any violent sense. It is simply the patient reassertion of equilibrium. Stone wants to be stone. Metal wants to be ore. Everything human-made is in the end borrowed from the earth and will eventually be returned to it, atom by atom, molecule by molecule, across spans of time that dwarf the entire existence of our species. The silence holds. Most paleontologists believe that the fossil record captures only a tiny fraction of the creatures that have ever lived. Some estimates suggest that fewer than 1% of all species that ever existed left any fossils at all, and of those only a fraction have been discovered and described by the patient work of scientists sifting through stone. The conditions required for fossilization are rare and specific, a convergence of circumstances that happens only occasionally across millions of years. An organism must die in a place where sediment can cover it quickly, where oxygen is scarce enough to prevent decay, where the right minerals are present to replace organic material with stone over the course of millions of years. Even then, the fossil must survive burial, compression, and the slow cooking of geological time without being destroyed by heat or pressure or the metamorphism that transforms sedimentary rock into harder, less legible forms. The vast majority of all life that has ever existed left no trace at all, vanishing as completely as if it had never been. Soft-bodied creatures without shells or bones had almost no chance of preservation, their delicate tissues dissolving within days of death. Marine organisms that lived in deep water where sediment accumulates slowly were rarely fossilized, their remains scattered by currents and consumed by scavengers long before burial could begin. Land animals in environments where erosion dominated over deposition simply vanished, their bones scattered and dissolved, their stories lost entirely to the silence of unrecorded time. If this is true for creatures that lived in enormous numbers across millions of years, spanning continents and filling every ecological niche, what hope would there be of finding evidence of a civilization that might have existed for only a few thousand years, or a few 100,000, in a world that has since been entirely reshaped by the slow violence of geology? The noon sun holds steady above an ocean that no longer exists. Scientists believe that any detectable signature of an ancient industrial civilization would need to be something that entered the geological record globally, something that changed the chemistry of the sediments or the composition of the atmosphere in ways that would persist even after the civilization itself was gone. Isotopic ratios, perhaps, shifted by the burning of fossil fuels or the manufacturing of synthetic materials. Unusual concentrations of certain elements, particularly those that are rare in nature but commonly used in technology. A thin layer of plastic-derived compounds or synthetic molecules that nature does not produce on its own. A signature written in chemistry rather than structure. Some studies propose that our own civilization, should it vanish tomorrow, would leave such signatures in the geological record for future intelligence to discover. The carbon we have released into the atmosphere by burning coal and oil and natural gas has already shifted the isotopic ratios of carbon in marine sediments worldwide. Carbon from ancient plants has a different ratio of carbon-13 to carbon-12 than carbon from other sources, and this signature is being recorded in the shells of sea creatures and the layers of sediment forming on the ocean floor right now, a thin line that will persist for millions of years. The nitrogen from our agricultural fertilizers has altered the nitrogen cycle globally, leaving traces in sediments from pole to pole. The plutonium from nuclear tests has left a detectable layer in sediments around the world, a thin band of radioactive material that will remain identifiable for millions of years, slowly decaying, but never quite disappearing. These traces might persist long after every building and road and artifact was ground to dust, but they would be subtle, requiring careful analysis to detect and interpret. They would require someone looking for them, someone who knew what signatures to seek, someone asking questions that might never occur to beings who had not themselves built an industrial civilization. The light begins its slow descent. Here, the question turns back upon itself, folding into uncertainty. If we know what signatures to look for, have we looked? Have geologists studying rock layers from hundreds of millions of years ago found anything that cannot be explained by natural processes, any anomaly that hints at intelligence and industry in the deep past? The honest response is that we do not know what we might have missed. For most of the history of geology as a science, no one was looking for such anomalies. When researchers did find unusual concentrations of elements or unexpected isotopic ratios, they sought explanations in volcanism, in asteroid impacts, in changes to ocean chemistry driven by continental configurations, and the slow cycles of the carbon and nitrogen. These explanations have generally been sufficient, fitting the data without requiring any extraordinary hypotheses. There is no clear evidence that anything like an industrial civilization existed on Earth before us, no smoking gun that would force scientists to reconsider the long solitude of geological time. But absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. The Earth is vast, and deep time is deeper still, a darkness that swallows most of what enters it. The geological record is incomplete, fragmentary, biased toward certain environments and time periods, preserving some moments and erasing others according to patterns we only partly understand. Entire epochs are represented by only a few scattered outcrops of rock, isolated windows into vanished worlds. And much of the ancient seafloor has long since been subducted into the mantle, carrying whatever secrets it held into the Earth's fiery interior, where they were melted and mixed and reformed into new rock that bears no memory of what came before. Beyond the record's edge, speculation begins to breathe. Perhaps the question is not whether a previous civilization existed, but what form it might have taken, what shape intelligence might wear in worlds we cannot imagine. We picture intelligence in our own image, building cities and factories, burning fuels and leaving waste, extending across landscapes we would recognize. But intelligence might arise in other forms entirely, might flourish in ways that leave different traces or No traces at all. A civilization of the deep ocean, building in materials that dissolve in seawater, communicating in ways that leave no physical mark, would leave different evidence than one of the land. Traces that would be even less likely to survive the subduction of oceanic crust. A civilization based on biotechnology rather than metallurgy, growing its tools from living tissue rather than forging them from ore, might leave no inorganic signatures at all, its achievements dissolving back into the organic cycle within generations of its passing. A civilization that rose and fell within a single geological instant, a few 100,000 years in a record measured in billions, might be invisible to our methods of detection, a whisper too brief to echo through the ages. It may be more honest to imagine that the question cannot be answered with certainty, that some mysteries are not meant to be solved but only contemplated, held gently in the mind as reminders of how much we do not know. The earth keeps its secrets well, holding them in stone and silence and the slow turning of continents. Entire landmasses have been subducted entirely, their rocks melted and reformed in the mantle, their histories erased more thoroughly than any fire could accomplish. Entire ecosystems have vanished without leaving a single fossil, their existence known to us only through inference and absence. The past is not a library where everything is cataloged and preserved. It is a vast darkness, illuminated only where accidents of geology happen to capture some fleeting moment in stone. And somewhere within that darkness, mysteries rest. Some researchers have wondered whether the question itself changes how we see our own civilization, whether contemplating the erasure of hypothetical predecessors forces us to contemplate our own eventual erasure. If we cannot be certain that nothing existed before us, then we cannot be certain that anything of us will remain for future intelligence to find. The same processes that would erase a hypothetical ancient civilization will eventually erase us, will grind our cities to sand, and scatter our greatest monuments across the sedimentary layers of a future we will never see. The same patient grinding of continents, the same slow folding of stone, the same chemical weathering that returns all things to their elemental forms. Perhaps the earth was remembering itself long before memory existed in any creature, carrying in its structure the echoes of every configuration that came before. Perhaps every arrangement of rock and water, every distribution of continent and ocean holds within it the compressed history of earlier arrangements, earlier distributions, earlier worlds, not as evidence, not as proof, but as possibility, as potential, as the raw material from which new worlds are always being made. The stone does not need to remember in the way we remember. It only needs to be what it is, shaped by everything that has happened, holding within its crystalline structure the compressed weight of time. The twilight deepens now. This is not a cause for despair. It is simply a recognition of scale, an invitation to humility before forces we can study but never master. We are brief. The earth is old. The universe is older still and vaster than we can comprehend. Whatever marks we leave upon the world, they are temporary in the way that all marks are temporary, scratches on the surface of something that continues to turn and change long after the hand that made them is gone. But temporary does not mean meaningless. A sunset is temporary. A conversation is temporary. A lifetime of love is temporary. These things matter not because they last, but because they happen at all, because they add their small light to the darkness, because they participate in the ongoing creation of a universe that has room for wonder. The same wind that once carried ash from ancient volcanoes now carries the dust of our cities. The same rain that fell on forests before the dinosaurs, before any creature walked on land, falls on our streets and our rooftops, and runs in rivulets toward the sea. The same ocean that covered the land before life crawled onto it still rises and falls along our shores, still pulls at the moon, still murmurs against the stone in a conversation that has been going on for billions of years. We are connected to the deep past not through evidence of other civilizations, but through the simple continuity of matter, the way that everything we are made of has been part of the earth since the earth began, cycling through rock and water and air and life in patterns too complex to trace. This is belonging. When stone forgets its shape, does it still remember heat? When a mountain erodes to sand, does the sand still carry the memory of height, of the forces that lifted it toward the sky? When a civilization passes from the world and leaves no trace, does the world still hold some echo of its presence in the patterns of its geology, the configuration of its elements, the subtle arrangements of its atoms? These questions have no answers in the language of science. They are questions of feeling, of the way we relate to a world that is so much older than we are, so much more patient, so much more continuous in its slow transformations. We ask them not because we expect answers, but because the asking itself is part of being human, part of being creatures who can contemplate time spans we can never experience, who can wonder about pasts we can never visit, and futures we will never see. The darkness gathers at the edges of the world. We are here for such a brief time. A human lifetime is less than an instant in the geological record, less than the thickness of a single layer of sediment, less than the time it takes for a continent to drift a measurable distance across the surface of the globe. And yet within that brief time, we wonder. We ask questions about what came before. We imagine possibilities that we can never prove or disprove. We look at the stars and the mountains and the ocean, and we feel something like awe, something like humility, something like gratitude for being part of something so much larger than ourselves, so much older, so much more enduring. This capacity for wonder is itself a kind of civilization, a way of being in the world that reaches beyond the limits of what we can know. It may be the most precious thing we create, more lasting in its way than any building or road or machine, because it shapes who we are and how we see, and that seeing changes everything. The wonder itself does not fossilize, but it shapes us, and we shape the world, and the patterns propagate outward in ways we cannot trace, ripples in a pond too vast to see. The night comes softly now. Somewhere beneath the seafloor, stone continues its slow descent into the mantle. Somewhere along the mid-ocean ridges, new crust is forming, fresh and hot and unmarked by any memory. Somewhere on a continent that will not exist in 50 million years, wind is eroding a hillside grain by grain, carrying the dust of ancient mountains toward the sea. The processes do not pause. They do not wait for us to understand them. They simply continue, as they have continued, as they will continue, long after the question of ancient civilizations has itself become ancient, has itself been folded into stone. The stars emerge, ancient light from ancient fires. There may have been others before us. There may have been intelligence that rose and fell in the deep past, civilizations that flourished for longer than humans have existed, that wondered about their own place in time, just as we wonder about ours, that looked up at different stars and asked the same questions we ask tonight. Or there may have been nothing, only the slow patience of geology, the long preparation of a planet that would eventually bring forth life and mind and the capacity to ask these questions. We cannot know. The earth does not answer such questions. It only continues to turn, carrying us through the darkness, holding its secrets in stone and silence. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the question is not meant to be answered, but only to be asked, a way of opening the mind to the vastness of time, a way of feeling our connection to something so much larger than ourselves. The same atoms that form our bodies have been cycling through the earth for billions of years. They have been part of mountains and oceans, part of creatures we will never name, part of processes we are only beginning to understand. They will continue cycling long after we are gone, becoming part of new mountains, new oceans, new creatures, new questions. The night deepens. Somewhere in the darkness, a continent drifts imperceptibly westward. Somewhere in the silence, sediment falls through black water toward the seafloor. Somewhere in the stillness, the earth breathes, as it has always breathed, in cycles too slow for us to perceive. We do not need to know if others came before. We only need to be here now, brief and wondering, part of the long story of a planet that keeps no permanent records, that transforms everything it touches, that holds us for a moment before letting us go. Sleep comes softly. The question remains, and the earth keeps breathing. So do we.